At what age are you going to die? A lot of people know they're going to die. And I said, I just wanted to know at what age you're going to die. And immediately he says, what do you mean? What age am I going to die? And I said, well, have you noticed that everybody dies and they always die at an age? I just wondered at what age you're going to die. And this is, I'm really well practiced with this because this is a central concept in Strategic Coach. We call it the lifetime extender, that most people have a loose sense about when they're going to die. And that can come from family history. They, generally speaking, in their family, people die around 70. They die around 75. And there's, a lot of evidence of when they die. Or they've been around actuarial tables. The average, I think, male in the United States is 77, 78. You die around then. So they can peg that in, I'm going to die when I'm 70 or 78. There's lots of people these days. I think there's close to 90,000 Americans who are over 100. So people live a lot longer than that. And so we have an exercise. I created this in 1987 for myself. I was watching documentary film, 1987, and it was a whole bunch of 87-year-olds. They had all been born in the year 1900, and they all had the goal to live to the year 2000. They were going to live 100 years. And they went into their lifetimes. They asked them all sorts of questions. A very busy century, there's just an enormous amount of things happened in their lifetime that they can remember all the way back to close to 1900. They have memories going back to, the teens, the wars, the First World War, Second World War, the Roaring 20s, the Great Depression. So they have all these memories. And I was really struck by this, and I said, boy, that would really be neat if you could be born in the first year of a century and live to the 100th year of the century. I said, that would be really cool. And I sort of got shortchanged because I was born in 1944, so it couldn't be the 20th century. I was shortchanged. I only got 56 years in the 20th century, so I said, why don't I just make it the 21st century? So I'll take 56 years from the 20th century, and then I'll add another 100. So the age I'm going to die at 156. And it was, silly thought. It was very silly. It was sort of a whimsical thought. And I like really testing out ideas. So what I said to myself, I'll tell you what, I wonder if I can develop the habit that every time I think of my lifetime, I think of the number 156. Because people who think they're going to die at 78, when they hear 78, they said, that's when I'm going to die. So, and it's interesting because 156 is double 78. And so I worked on it by myself, but every time I thought about my lifetime, I would just say 156, the year 2100. You're going to live till that long. And about 3 years, it just came automatically. So since 1990, every time I think about my lifetime, I think 156. And then I'm married. My great partner, Bab Smith, I didn't tell her at all that I was doing this. And then when I had done it for 3 years and it was automatic, I said, I just want to tell you that I'm planning to live to 156. And I explained what I had done. She says, well, I'm going to live to 149 then. She's 7 years younger. And she says, we'll beam up together. In the year 2100. And then in Strategic Coach, we do thinking exercises. So in 1993, I had a really high-level group of entrepreneurs, very talented, very successful, very, very ambitious entrepreneurs. And I had done a little form where they could put down when they were born, and then they could put down at the age they thought that they were going to die, And I remember this one person, he was about, 50 years old, and he said, I'm going to die at 85. He's an insurance agent, so he's really around actuarial tables. And I says, 85, okay, can I ask you some questions? I said, I'm not going to ask you about 85, I'm going to ask you about 84, age 84. And I said, so when you're 84, you're not dying that year, so you're at 84, how are you going to be physically? And he said, Oh, great shape, good shape. And he said, I work out a lot, so great shape. I said, great. Mentally, how would you be? And he says, sharp, all the marbles are still there, everything's still working. I said, good. Financially, everything's taken care of. I'm in the business. I should be well taken care of. I said, relationships, quality of your relationships, business, personal relationships. He says, so lots of relationships, very warm, very supportive. I said, good. And you've lived 84 years. What do you want to say about the 84 years that you've lived? And he said, yeah, made the most of it. Really, happy with my success. A lot of significance. I've done a lot of great things for other people. Feeling very, very satisfied. I said, good. And meanwhile, I'd been asking everybody else to write down their answers to the 5 questions. So they had all filled it in, and I said, okay, so if you were that way at 84, it's 34 years from now, you're 50 right now, 34 years from now, what do you think the chances are if you were physically really great, mentally sharp, financially well off, have great relationships, and you feel really great about what you've achieved? What do you think the chances are you'd die a year later at 85? And he says, no, I wouldn't. And I says, well, how much longer than 85? If you were that way at 84, how much longer than 85 do you think you would live? And he says, I don't know, 10, 15 years? And I said, well, which? 10 or 15 makes a difference. And he said, 15. I says, okay, you've been here a half hour. This was at the beginning of the workshop. I said, you've been a half hour. I just bought you 15 more years. And and everybody laughed like it was a joke. And I said, no, you just changed a number in your brain. Up until now, you've had 85 as your brain. And that number has been determining a million other thoughts that you have in your brain. All the decisions you're making, your plans and everything are geared to that. And you have witnesses. I was here. They all heard what you said. You just extended it by 15 years. And you're going to notice that when you walk out today, that life has changed. Life has totally changed. Our company has done this close to 25,000 entrepreneurs since 1993, probably, closing in on 25,000. I'm not quite sure of the number. And the thing that's really, really interesting about this is that you change the number, you change your ambition. So if you're 50 and you think you're going to die at 85, just observing a lot of what happens to people when they get to 60 and 65, you're going to feel that you've run out of ambition, and now you're going to be talking about the boat, you're going to be talking about the cottage, you're going to be talking about just sitting in on boards. You aren't going to be active anymore. But now that you've got another 15 years, I predict that you will, when you hit 75, you're going to be roaring. Your ambition's going to be great because, at 75, you've got another 30 years, and you've got another 35 years to go. And there's no way you're bailing out at 75. So we've been doing this for 30, since 93, so 30 plus years. And I think it's going to take 50 or 60 years before we really see whether it really translates into people living into their 90s and their hundreds. But I do know that we have close to 25,000 people, and I would say close to 95% of them have set ages when they're going to die above 100 years, 105, 110, 120. World record, by the way, is 122, where we have accurate records. A woman in France, she's the first one to 120, where we have records, first one to 121, first one to 122. Okay, things really start falling apart. 110, we got a lot of 110 years old, but we don't have many 120-year-olds, so we know things fall apart when they get going there. But the big thing about it is that I'm 81, and I am far, far more ambitious at 81 than I was at 50. At 50, and the reason is about 10 years ago when I was 70, I decided that I had all the necessary capabilities of myself, but now I was going to get really good at accessing other people's capabilities. Now it's going to be teamwork and collaboration. And once you get into teamwork and collaboration, using all the capabilities you have, it's just a multiplier. So you can think bigger, you can plan bigger, you can have much bigger goals. And it's really interesting right now because it's becoming an issue because the birth rate across the world, the birth rate has really gone down. And I'm seeing some statistics. For example, 1/3 of Americans above the working age Americans who are, have been working all their life, 1/3 of them now are above 65, which is the normal retirement age. And they find that 1/3 of them, it's absolutely by desire that they keep working beyond 65. They're in their 70s and 80s. And one of the reasons why they're not going to be retiring is because they're needed. And before you wanted to get them out of the workplace, now you want them to stay in the workplace. So I think we're going through some big changes. But just as it relates to you, let's say you do the exercise for yourself. You've picked the number, you just write it down. This is when I was born, this is how old I am, this is when I'm going to die. And then go through that 5-step questions about the year before you think you're going to die. And I can guarantee you'll give yourself an extra 10 years. You'll give yourself an extra 15, 20. I've had people give the extra 50 years. And I'm still sitting there with my 156. And it's interesting. About 15 years ago, I did a very, very in-depth physical exam. And there's a organization, they have a test, it's called glycan age, and it's been going for about 30 years. And it sort of tells, this is your chronological age. So my chronological age was about 66 at that time. And but my biological age, in other words, what the test told about my body, I was about 68. So at 66 chronologically, I was 68 biologically. So I was aging faster than my actual age. My partner, my wife, my companion in life, we got real serious about really going to great clinics, investigating really great therapies, and doing much more testing that we have. And I just had my glycan age test at 80, and my biological age was 59, so I've dropped down. I'm 21 years younger. I'm just a year older than Joe now. I don't work out like he does, so he's probably probably a lot younger than his chronological age. But the big thing is that in the first session, we talked about thinking in terms of a 6-year framework for your goals, where you look back 3 years and then you learn from the last 3 years, you multiply for the next 3 years. So that's a capability. That's a ambition capability. All of a sudden, your ambition goes up. The lifetime extender does the same thing as you really establish the date when you're going to die. All of a sudden, you notice this ambition. Oh, there's a lot more that I have to accomplish. Well, when your brain tells you there's a lot more that you have to accomplish, your ambition just got bigger. Your ambition for just your own capabilities and your ambition for your teamwork and your collaboration with other people. So I can just tell you that I have the experience of thousands of entrepreneurs that we've worked with, and I can just give you some results that I can see. All these individuals I've worked with, they feel younger again after they do the exercise. They feel younger. They start thinking and acting younger. They achieve more in the next 10 years than they did in the previous 20. They extend their entrepreneurial career decades longer. I had one entrepreneur who came into Strategic Coach at 65, and he said, I'm going to use the next 3 years to plan for my retirement, and my wife and I are going to start a gourmet coffee shop. He ran a big engineering firm. So we did the exercise, the lifetime extender. And I said, well, we got some thinking to do today, so let's talk about it in 90 days. And he came back and he said, I just realized from doing that exercise that I was planning to die at 76. I was 65. I was planning to die I was planning to die. And he said, that really scared me. So here's he says, we're number 42 in our category as an engineering company, specialized engineering company. We're number 42. So over the next 10 years, we're going to get to number 1, and we're going to grow and grow and grow. And that was 8 years ago, and he hit number 1 2 years ago. He did it 2 years before he did. And he said, I'm so excited. He said, I've never been so excited in my life. And I said, what about the gourmet coffee shop? He says, you can always go to a gourmet coffee shop. He says, but you can't do what I'm doing right now. So anyway, I just want to tell you that how you think about time. In the first session, we talked about the 6-year framework. And now we're talking about the lifetime extender, actually adding years to your life. And you'll find that you are taking that capability called ambition, and you can grow it and grow it and grow it and grow it.
Dan, it was great hearing you elaborate more on ambition as a muscle that grows, and that at 81 years old, I thought it was pretty funny where you said your AI capabilities at 81, and that ambition is central to all other capabilities. So just like a technology is a brain extender, ambition is a capability extender.
Mm-hmm. I came across a great author, and I'd like to put in a plug for him. His name is Angus Fletcher. He's a professor at Ohio State University. And he's just written an amazing book. I think it's the best book I've read in the last 25 years. It's called Primal Intelligence. And he said, we're at a point right now because of the emergence of artificial intelligence. He says, we have to get back to the uniqueness of human thinking, which is not logic. He said logic, the entire technological world is based on logic, and technology's gotten really fast, very fast. And, it started, with microchips about 50 years ago, maybe 60 years ago. But now we've hit AI, and AI is almost instantaneous. You ask it to do something, and 3 or 4 seconds later, if it's not too difficult, you have your result, you have your answer. And he says that you can't be, but it's all logic. He said this is all mathematical logic. And he says, and we've tried over thousands of years to get human beings to be good at mathematical logic. And he says, we just lost the game. He said, we just lost the game. So why don't we go back to what is the best kind of thinking as far as human beings go? And he says, based on 4 principles: intuition, imagination, emotion, and common sense. He says that's humans are just the masters of intuition, imagination, emotion, and common sense. And now we get to be really human instead of half human. He said, unfortunately, the entire school system is based on making people mathematically logical so that they get the right answer. And he says, most human beings have never thought for themselves. They think like school. They think like their teachers. They're followers. They're not leaders. And he says, time for human beings to become leaders. So it's a really great book. And so I think a lot of where we're heading is a lot of what you talk about, Joe, is really listening what's going on in another person. What's actually happening to the person. That's sort of contextual. The person is saying this, but what is actually being said? At what level is it being said?
Yeah, I think that's actually part of the key when you are listening. And the thing where you talked about any new capability deepens your ambition. That is a framing. I mean, I've heard you say that before. You just gave me a different way to think about it when you personalized it for me, which I think everything that we're talking about here on our conversations for people listening, the more you can personalize it and apply it as an example into your own life, the more it obviously makes sense, because people oftentimes will listen to something, then they'll hear it, but they're not connected with it. Very similar to what I say about you're either communicating, you're connecting, or you're trying to escape. And when you had said, like my ghost town and my mining operation, I never thought of it that way. I bought a ghost town. People are like, oh, so are you making money from the ghost town? And I said, well, that wasn't actually the reason I bought a ghost town. It wasn't a real estate investment for me. It was like a blank canvas. And I, for one, I thought it was just kind of a cool project. I did it with, people that I like. And so we have I have a great group of a couple of partners, and it just took on this life of its own. But to me, it was a bit of an art project, and the name of the ghost town is Cleator, Arizona, and I originally thought Cleator for creator. We bought the whole town, and we could change the name of the town, but I didn't really want to because it had this really cool history. It was established, in 1864 as a mining town.
And it still has inhabitants, and you could have cleared the town and got rid of all the inhabitants, but that doesn't suit you at all. You actually put more meaning back into their life.
Oh, yeah, completely. I mean, we saved the town, I believe. Someone wanted to buy it before us, and they wanted to bulldoze it down and turn it into an RV park, which would have been a real tragedy. And
besides, there's already one 20 miles more down the road, isn't there?
Exactly. Oh, yeah, there's RV parks everywhere, right? It's on the way to Sedona. So, when you said that, though, I was like, oh, wow, since I did buy that ghost town, then it led into this big mining operation.
Well, then you found out you still had the mines still worked. They shut down because of the Second World War. They didn't shut down because there wasn't silver and copper and gold or whatever is down there. I'm an investor, so I should know what I've invested in. All I know is that the stock has gone up.
Yeah. We took the company public 5 years ago. If anyone would have said you would be in that business or you'd own a ghost town, I'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? But now there's all these other things, and now people go to our ghost town and they rent the town to do art events, and we have a schoolhouse where there's been everything from breath work to people, financial advisors doing workshops for their clients. We put the town in VR there's just so many crazy things that have happened as a result of it. Now, one guy who is a very successful person said, I want to set up a greenhouse there and grow organic, non-pesticide lettuce and vegetables, and I think we can make this thing work. And he's like, I'll pay for everything, and we'll try it. And if we do that, I'm like, you know what? I got a lot of land there, so we definitely can do that. So now for people, I have this thing like, what's your cleator? In the term for that is, what is a goal? What is kind of like a moonshot, or however you want to describe a big ambition that you would feel crazy to do it, but you really want to do it. And
yeah, well, I think the big thing, we have a thinking tool in Strategic Coach, which is called the 4 C's, and I mentioned it just briefly on my previous session. Anytime you're committed to creating something new that you haven't done before, and because you haven't done it before, you're not confident that you could do it. Okay, so you have to go through a period of courage to move forward. And even though you don't know exactly what's involved and you don't know all the skills that it's going to take to get it done, you move forward. That's going through courage. And I think it's anytime you commit yourself to something where you don't have the capability, you don't have the confidence, but you have the commitment, and you're willing to go through the courage, that develops ambition. I think ambition it's like new muscle gets developed. You're doing a new exercise. You've never done it before. And the first time through, you don't do it well. You're sore afterwards and everything else, but then muscle grows. And so my feeling is that the muscle analogy for ambition is a real one. And not only that, but you've been, since you first investigated this and got it going, I've seen you as enormously excited about this project.
So to go to your 4 C's, commitment, courage, confidence, and capabilities, the more that you deepen your ambition, you just kind of say you do it with capabilities, and they both.
I'll just take you back to the day before you ever Cleater ever occurred to you. And I've been along for the trip, so I know when you first started talking about this. The big thing is that your whole vision of what you could do with something that's basically a throwaway piece of geography, it doesn't count anymore. And this is going to be like a big thing. And there's examples. America's really good at this. The United States really likes this sort of stuff, American culture. I think of Wall Drug, and anytime you get within 1,000 miles of Wall Drug, and it's just it's basically just a store that sits out in the way out place, and it says you're now 1,000 miles from Wall Drug. You're now 577 miles from Wall Drug. You're now 230, and they get tens of thousands of people who come there. It's just a store, they mostly selling tourist trap stuff and everything. Or Luckenbach, Texas. This was Waylon Jennings, country and western singer. And, that somebody wrote a song called Going Back to Luckenbach, Texas. And it just went right to the top. It went right to the top. And he hated it. He said, I hate it. And now, tens of thousands of people go to Luckenbach, Texas. They have reunions there. They get married there. And everything like that. And, U.S. is basically an ADD culture. Any shiny squirrel, they can turn out a big deal about that. But it's given you enormous ambition. Ambition about putting this on the map. And every quarter when I talk to you about it, there's a new dimension that's been added to the story. It's about 20 dimensions deep now after about 5 years.
You remind me, okay, so I was born in El Paso, Texas. I lived in different parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas my whole childhood because we would uproot and move every year or two because after my mother died when I was 4 years old, my father could never settle down anywhere. So I have driven through so many small little towns, and I would see those billboards, right? And it was marketing, it was promotion. And they would have these little trading posts to these different little hole-in-the-wall places that are selling stuff to tourists and people that are traveling. And there was one, I don't even know if it's still around because it's been years, and it said The Thing. You're however many miles from The Thing. And what The Thing was like literally an old mummy. I don't know if they even display this anymore. And it was in this place, and of course they just sold all this tourist stuff. But there was a sugar packet that I saw, and my brain remembers dirty jokes and quotes. I have no idea why. But there was this quote on this caption on a packet of sugar, which I wasn't even using. I just picked it up because it was sitting on the restaurant table, and I'm looking at the different captions, and it said, "He who has something to sell and whispers in a well is not as apt to make the shiny dollar as the guy that climbs a tree and hollers." And I never forgot that because I was like, okay, if you have something to sell in the world, you're not as apt to make the shiny dollar if you don't tell people about it. It's if you whisper in a well versus
climbing a tree and shouting.
Yep, you're going to get a much different result. So so let's go to your the final thing I want to say on this segment is you talked about how when you had watched the documentary and you had this concept and you did it for 3 years of the lifetime extender, you said you change your number, the age you're going to die, you change your ambition. And I was like, I've heard you talk about this a lot, right? Of course, we've even done podcasts where me and you talk about lifetime extender and all of the skeptics and all of the people that say, what about this? What about that? And so instead of hitting you with all these questions, because there's a lot of those out there, I love the whole concept of like, okay, you want an instant way to reframe your ambition, then ask yourself, how old are you going to be when you're going to die? And what are you going to be doing right before that? And if you have, and you extend your life. And now, maybe that's not going to come true. Maybe Dan's not going to live to 156. And there's a ton of people that are like, Dan's full of crap. There's no way he's going to live that. He's living in this, whatever, false belief he has. Well, you're one of the few 81-year-olds. Actually, there's two people, you and our buddy Peter Thomas, the most ambitious 80-year-old people that I know. I would put Joel Weldon on that list, but these are individuals, and what's the whole thing? They're all ambitious. They're all pursuing stuff. They're all taking care of their health. They work out, they exercise, and they actually have a disdain for hanging around what they call old people, because most of them have bought in to the fact that they're shutting down. And like you have said, they're putting a message out to send it back to the factory. Okay, we're running out of time here. And you're just like, you know what? I've extended the expiration date. And if you have an expiration date that this is only good till then where the hell's your ambition? Your ambition is going to stop when you say it's going to stop. So I think what we're talking about here is a level of committed self-talk that is amazing. Yeah. And I was at your 70th birthday, by the way. It was a surprise birthday. Remember that? Mm-hmm. And of course you remember that. And what you said, once you made that decision that it's at this point it's going to be about teamwork and collaboration. So, yeah, I thought that was just really insightful, Dan.